All right, take a step back for a moment. Imagine standing on a high mountain, looking down at the entire history of human civilization. You'd see the grand empires of the past: Rome, Persia, Byzantium, the Mongol Empire, the British Empire, the Soviet Union, all of them like waves crashing on the shore. They rise, dominate, flourish, and then crumble into dust. Every single one. It's almost eerie, isn't it? No matter how powerful, enlightened, or advanced a society becomes, there's always an inevitable decline. But have you ever wondered why? Wars? Sure, they play a part. Greed? Definitely. Corruption? Without a doubt. But these are just symptoms of a much deeper, much more fundamental force. Beneath the surface of every historical collapse, there exists something constant, relentless, and quietly destructive. It does not discriminate by race, class, or culture. It doesn't care whether you are rich or poor, educated or illiterate. It exists in every government, every institution, every workplace, and even in our everyday interactions. What is this mysterious, unrelenting force that has shaped history more than any king, emperor, or revolution? It is ignorance in its purest form, an unshakable reality of human existence. No matter how much humanity advances, no matter how many books we write, discoveries we make, or lessons we claim to learn, ignorance remains a defining feature of history. It has caused more destruction, more suffering, and more setbacks than any other force in the world. And the worst part? We constantly underestimate it. We like to believe that ignorance is just a minor inconvenience, something we can brush off with a sarcastic joke or a clever remark. But no, my friend, it is far more than that. Ignorance is a silent destroyer of civilizations. It has ruined economies, started wars, toppled governments, and even held back scientific progress for centuries. And it's not just about other people. It's about you. It's about me. It's about the way we navigate life, the decisions we make, and the perspectives we adopt. Because whether we realize it or not, ignorance isn't just something that exists out there. It exists within us too. So now we come to the most important question of all. How does ignorance work? If we're going to survive, if we're going to be among the few who don't fall into its trap, then we need to understand its nature. Ignorance isn't random chaos. It follows specific patterns. It moves in predictable ways, much like a force of nature. And once you understand these patterns, you will never see the world the same way again. So let's get to it. Let's define the laws of ignorance and figure out how to protect ourselves from this invisible but immensely powerful force. Because history has shown us one thing: ignorance doesn't need a reason to destroy everything. It just does. And if we don't learn to recognize it, we'll be its next victims. Are you ready? Let's go. The first law of ignorance: the underestimation trap. If there is one universal mistake humanity makes over and over again, it's this: we always underestimate the power of ignorance. It doesn't matter if you're the smartest person in the room, a seasoned strategist, or a highly trained expert. At some point, you will overestimate the intelligence of others, and that will cost you. We like to believe that people are rational beings. We assume that when presented with facts, reason, and logic, they will make the right choice, or at least a choice that makes sense. But that's where we go wrong, because, my friend, ignorance does not follow logic. It does not obey reason. It does not require an explanation to exist. Why do we keep falling for this? Why do intelligent people, time and time again, assume that others will act rationally? The answer is simple: because intelligence comes with a flaw. It makes us believe that just because we can see things clearly, others will too. It's called the illusion of rationality, and it's one of the biggest blind spots in human thinking. You assume that because you wouldn't do something incredibly foolish, others wouldn't either. You assume that if there's an obviously better decision, people will take it. You assume that if you explain something clearly, people will understand. But here's the truth. Ignorance is not just a lack of information. It exists independently of knowledge, education, or experience. And the moment you think you can reason your way around it, you've already lost. Now, let's talk about how underestimating ignorance has literally destroyed civilizations. The Roman Empire, the one that dominated the world for centuries, collapsed not just because of external enemies, but because of poor decisions made within. Leaders ignored clear warnings. The economy was collapsing, but they kept making the same mistakes. Barbarian invasions were coming, but they fought among themselves instead of preparing. Fast forward to the 20th century, the Great Depression. The people in charge, some of the most educated minds of their time, ignored obvious economic risks. They assumed that people would act in their own best interest, that greed had limits, and that economic growth would continue indefinitely. They were wrong. And what followed was a financial collapse that plunged millions into poverty. Now, here's something even darker. When ignorance is combined with fear, manipulation, and power, it leads to some of the greatest atrocities in history. People watched destructive regimes rise, convinced that it couldn't really happen. Intellectuals and leaders assumed that propaganda wouldn't work because people were too smart for that. But history proved them wrong. Ignorance, when left unchecked, doesn't just harm individuals, it shapes the destiny of entire civilizations, and that's why the first law of ignorance is so crucial. Never assume that rationality will prevail on its own. The second law of ignorance, the unchanging constant if. The first law wasn't unsettling enough, buckle up, because this one is even worse. Ignorance is not just common, it is constant. It does not decrease with education. It does not fade with progress. It is as unshakable as gravity. Every society, every era, every civilization, no matter how advanced, has been plagued by the same proportion of ignorance. You might think, but we live in the most technologically advanced age in history. Surely, intelligence is winning. Oh, my friend, if anything, ignorance is thriving now more than ever. Technology doesn't eliminate ignorance, it amplifies it. The internet has put all human knowledge at our fingertips, yet misinformation spreads faster than ever. AI can make complex calculations, but people still fall for scams. We have instant access to facts, but absurd conspiracy theories continue to dominate discussions. Ignorance has found the perfect home in the digital age because now it can travel at the speed of light. Think about it. In the past, a bad idea could only spread as fast as a person could speak or write. But today, one false claim can reach millions in seconds. If history has taught us anything, it's this. Humanity doesn't become less ignorant. It just finds more creative ways to show it. How do we protect ourselves? You cannot eliminate ignorance, but you can learn to navigate around it. Recognize ignorance early. The faster you identify it, the faster you can move away. Do not argue with irrational people. You will waste time and energy. Surround yourself with intelligent minds. Create spaces where wisdom thrives. Never assume that progress means ignorance has disappeared. Stay vigilant, because at the end of the day, the only thing more dangerous than ignorance is failing to recognize it when it's right in front of you. And that, my friend, is the hard truth. Are you ready for the next law? Because trust me, this is just the beginning. Let's go deeper. You said, continue. ChatGPT said, the third law of ignorance. The most dangerous people in the world, we've established two harsh realities. Ignorance is universally underestimated. First law. Ignorance is a constant force that does not fade with progress. Second law. Now we arrive at the most terrifying truth of them all. This is the law that ruins lives, destroys civilizations, and causes suffering on a scale unmatched by any other force in history. Let me hit you with a brutal truth. The most dangerous person is not the corrupt, not the criminal, not the tyrant. It is the irrational. Why? Because corrupt individuals, criminals, and tyrants have motives. They are driven by self-interest, money, power, control. Their actions, while destructive, follow a logic that can be understood, anticipated, and sometimes even countered. But an irrational person, They are dangerous because their actions have no logical pattern, no self-preserving strategy, no rational goal. They create destruction, not because they gain anything from it, but simply because they act without understanding. Consequences. If someone harms you for personal gain, at least you can prepare for it. That's just self-interest at work, even if it's unethical. But when someone harms you for no reason, without benefiting themselves, how do you fight that? The answer? You can't. Not with reason, not with negotiation, not with logic. This is what makes irrational ignorance the most chaotic, unpredictable, and dangerous force in the world. Most people assume that evil is the greatest danger. They fear criminals, corrupt politicians, and dictators. But here's the truth. A corrupt person steals from you. An irrational person burns down the entire house, including their own room. A corrupt politician will exploit the system for personal gain. An irrational politician will wreck the system for no clear reason. A ruthless warlord will wage war for territory and power. An irrational leader will start conflicts that lead to unnecessary suffering for everyone, including themselves. Con artist will scam you for financial gain. An irrational person will spread falsehoods and cause harm without even realizing it. And that's why ignorance, when combined with a lack of awareness, becomes the deadliest force of all. How ignorance has destroyed civilizations. History is filled with examples of entire nations suffering, not just from evil, but from reckless, irrational, short-sighted decisions. Take the 2008 financial crisis. The banks gave out bad loans that everyone knew would eventually collapse. Yet irrational decision-making prevailed. People acted as if reality wouldn't catch up to them. When the financial system crashed, nobody won, not the bankers, not the investors, not the average citizens. It was a disaster caused not just by greed, but by blindness to consequences. Take the fall of great empires. The Roman elite ignored every warning of decline, assuming that stability would last forever. The Ottoman Empire resisted modernization, dismissing the need for change until it was too late. The Soviet Union collapsed, under policies that made no economic sense, yet leaders clung to them for decades, believing reality would bend to ideology. And what about wars that should never have happened? Leaders ignored clear warning signs, dismissed rational diplomacy, and led millions to destruction, not out of strategy, but because they refused to acknowledge the reality of their own errors. The pattern is clear. The most destructive mistakes in history have been made not by the malicious, but by the blind, the reckless, the irrational. How do we counter the dangers of ignorance? If we can't reason with ignorance, how do we defend ourselves against it? Avoid irrational people whenever possible. They will drag you into their chaos. You cannot negotiate with a force that doesn't recognize consequences. Do not waste energy trying to fix ignorance. You won't succeed unless the individual is open to learning. Some people are trapped in their own misconceptions, and nothing will change them. Identify patterns of irrationality in leadership. The worst disasters come from foolish leaders making decisions that harm everyone, including themselves. The sooner you recognize these patterns, the sooner you can prepare. Watch for collective irrationality. Mass movements, groupthink, and hysteria often overpower individual reason. When you see an entire society moving in a destructive direction, step back and reassess before following the crowd. Stay self-aware. The worst ignorance is the one we don't recognize in ourselves. Always challenge your own assumptions, question your own beliefs, and stay open to learning. Because the truth is, you cannot fight ignorance directly, but you can protect yourself from it, and those who fail to recognize this, they are the ones who suffer the most. The fourth law of ignorance. Why it keeps winning. Now that we understand ignorance, we must ask, why do societies allow it to thrive? Why does it hold so much power despite its destructive nature? Here's the uncomfortable answer. Ignorance is loud. Intelligence is quiet. Throughout history, the least competent people have often held the most influence, not because they are wise, but because they are unafraid to act without hesitation. Smart. People analyze before making decisions. Ignorant people charge forward without doubt. And in a world where confidence often matters more than competence, guess who gets the attention? That's why the loudest, most reckless individuals often rise to power, because they don't hesitate, they don't overthink, and they don't doubt themselves. Meanwhile, intelligent individuals who could actually improve society spend so much time questioning and refining their ideas that they are often overshadowed. This is how ignorance infects institutions, governments, and entire civilizations. It follows a pattern. People mistake loud confidence for wisdom. Irrational decisions spread like wildfire. By the time intelligent people realize the danger, the damage is already done. That's why history repeats itself. That's why preventable disasters aren't prevented. That's why civilizations crumble, not because nobody saw the warning signs, but because too many people ignored them. How do we break the cycle? We may not be able to eliminate ignorance, but we can counter its influence. Do not mistake confidence for intelligence. Just because someone speaks with certainty does not mean they are right. Question popular movements and trends. The majority is often wrong, especially when decisions are made emotionally rather than logically. Seek wisdom over noise. Loud voices do not equal great ideas. The most profound truths are often found in careful reflection, not in mass hysteria. Strengthen the influence of intelligence. Support systems, institutions, and leadership that prioritize logic and wisdom over impulsiveness. Stay vigilant. Ignorance wins when people assume they are safe from it. Never stop learning, questioning, and preparing. Because here's the hard truth. Ignorance will always exist. It will always find a way to spread. It will always seek power. But those who recognize its nature, those who see the patterns, those who refuse to be dragged down by it, they are the ones who survive. And that, my friend, is the key difference between those who rise and those who fall. Now, are you ready for the final law of ignorance? Because trust me, this is where it gets truly terrifying. Let's go deeper. The fifth law of ignorance, the most dangerous type of person. We've uncovered 4 brutal truths. Ignorance is underestimated. Ignorance is a constant force that does not fade with progress. The most dangerous people are not the corrupt, but the irrational. Ignorance keeps winning because it is loud, confident, and relentless. Now we arrive at the final, most unsettling truth. The most destructive individuals are not the ones who simply make mistakes. They are the ones who do harm without even realizing it. This is the ultimate danger of ignorance. It does not just affect individuals, it spreads, infects, and reshapes societies. And the most destructive people? They are the ones who unknowingly bring ruin upon themselves and others. Let me explain. If someone steals from you, deceives you, or manipulates you, at least there is an intent, something you can anticipate, counter, or defend against. But when someone harms you without even understanding that they are doing it, what defense do you have? That's why irrational ignorance is far more dangerous than malice. Because a corrupt individual still acts with some level of calculation, but the truly ignorant, they destroy everything, including themselves, without a second thought. Consider a reckless leader who ignores economic realities, leading to financial disaster. Consider a scientist who disregards safety warnings, causing unintended catastrophe. Consider a policymaker who implements a law without understanding its consequences, hurting the very people they intended to help. In each case, the destruction is not caused by intentional malice. It is caused by blind confidence in one's own false understanding, and that is the defining characteristic of the most dangerous type of person. They do not know how little they actually know. One of the greatest ironies of history is that ignorance does not just destroy societies, it eventually destroys itself. The problem is that before it collapses, it takes everything else down with it. The leaders of declining empires refuse to see reality until their nations fall. The economists of failing financial systems believe they can manipulate the numbers until markets crash. The overconfident decision-makers assume their actions will work even as they make problems worse. By the time reality catches up to them, the damage is already done. Ignorance does not correct itself until it has already caused collapse. And that's why ignorance is never just a personal flaw, it's a societal threat. Now, if there's one mistake that rational people make over and over again, it's this. They assume ignorance will correct itself. It won't. If history has taught us anything, it's that ignorance left unchecked always leads to collapse. Because ignorance does not fix itself. It does not wake up one day and realize its own errors. It only stops when it has run out of things to destroy. So the question is, what do we do about it? How do we protect ourselves? Since ignorance is an unavoidable force, survival depends on learning how to navigate it. Recognize ignorance before it becomes dangerous. The earlier you identify irrational decision-making, the easier it is to avoid its consequences. Stay alert. For patterns of self-deception, blind confidence, and reckless behavior. Do not waste energy trying to reason with ignorance. You cannot argue with someone who does not understand why they are wrong. If someone refuses to learn, move on. Focus your efforts where they will actually make a difference. Avoid institutions and systems infected with ignorance. Once ignorance takes control of an organization, it becomes nearly impossible to fix from within. If you see irrational leadership taking over, get out before it collapses. Surround yourself with rational minds. Ignorance spreads, but so does intelligence. The more you engage with logical, thoughtful people, the stronger your ability to resist ignorance. Keep your own ignorance in check. No one is immune to blind spots. The moment you assume you are completely free of ignorance is the moment you start making mistakes. Stay open to learning, questioning, and reevaluating your own beliefs, because ultimately, the only true defense against ignorance is awareness. The final truth: you can't stop ignorance, but you can survive it. If you've made it this far, you now understand the brutal reality of ignorance. It is everywhere. It never fades. It is louder than wisdom. It destroys without intention. So where does that leave us? Are we doomed? Not necessarily. Yes, ignorance is eternal. But intelligence is a choice. You cannot stop ignorance from existing, but you can refuse to let it dictate your life. You cannot eliminate stupidity, but you can navigate around it. You cannot force people to see reality, but you can make sure you see it clearly yourself. And that is the ultimate survival skill in an age where ignorance is louder than ever. Do not fight ignorance directly. It will only consume you. Instead, recognize it, outmaneuver it, and rise above it. Because, my friend, intelligence may be rare, but it is powerful. And those who understand the nature of ignorance, they are the ones who survive. Now that you understand the 5 laws of ignorance, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you fall into the same traps that history has warned us about? Or will you be among the few who see the patterns, adapt, and stay ahead of the collapse? The choice is yours. But remember this: ignorance is always waiting. The question is, will you be ready for it?